How many of us get married in our lifetime, and for what reasons do we get married? Is it nature or is it nurture? Is it something socially constructed or something we're destined to experience in our life? Ultimately, what is our purpose for even being here? Now, that's going to the philosophical roots of sociology. And today we're going to look at marriage, singlehood, and procreation in a sociological way. My name is Akello Stone, and I'm an adjunct professor of sociology at El Camino College in Los Angeles, California. And I'll be presenting with.
Dr. Beverly Thompson. I am a sociology professor in Albany, New York.
So, what a topic to talk about. When I think about marriage, I immediately think about the ritual and the pageantry around it. I think about the dresses and the weddings and the venue and how many people are there and photography and this whole social ritual acknowledging some sort of conformist rite of passage, if you will. But again, when I think about marriage, though, I think about where does this fall on this kind of conceptual timeline, the timeline of what I call human life purpose or potential. Why are we here? What are we supposed to be doing? Integrating kind of like the major milestones in life. And when I think about the first major milestone in life, it's birth. And then the other end of the spectrum is the afterlife. And of course, along the way, I have marriage, procreation, and death. There's your life. But even though there are about 25% of people in the United States who do not marry, who remain single throughout their life, there are those that choose to recreate that marriage ritual and marry themselves. And that is called sologamy, which is something we're going to talk about because I haven't heard a lot of discussion about it. And I even mentioned what sologamy was and talked to my students about it to see what their thoughts were. And none had actually heard of the term.
Sologamy. This is the first time I have heard this word, sologamy. But I'm pretty sure I'm in the group sologamy.
An official term for being single.
I think loving yourself, making a commitment to caring for yourself and, improving who you are every day it's great.
Being okay with who we are, being okay with self-awareness and self-esteem.
It's very interesting to think about how does that look? Like, what does the daily routine of somebody who's in a sologamy relationship look like?
I feel like I have much better be alone than be with someone, just in my point of view.
But I just don't see any net gain to society by making it legal.
If someone wants to marry themselves, cool, great. Sign me up. Where are you registered? Let's party. I think I might be one.
So it's very kind of, I guess we will say trending in a way. If you look at the online videos and things like that, people are posting, those rituals. But is it something real? Is it something viable? Why do people do it? And what does it actually mean as it relates to marriage and traditional marriage?
Yeah, and these are topics that you and I both cover in our sociology of the family class. We've been both teaching this class for over decades, one or
Yes.
two decades, a long time. And so even in our classrooms, we see changing demographics and trends amongst our students. And with your clip with students, I thought it was really interesting because we expect students to say they've never heard of this or they would reject this. But what was most interesting to me is that at least one of them said, yeah, that's me. That's what I want to do.
Yeah, it's interesting because I didn't expect that. What I always expect is kind of like, oh, I never even heard of that. I never even considered it. But as you already know, when you start studying sociology, particularly when you look at things around the family and identity and things like marriage and who we are as people, sometimes we come across a concept and an idea and we're like, I never even knew that idea existed. I feel like I can relate to that idea and what that means. The other thing is a lot of people today, at least in my personal circle, have had a lot of failed relationships, either long-term relationships or even marriages. I know people who are on their second or third marriage. And so I just still find that fascinating that the choices being made. I do have some stats I'll have to pull up about how much the average divorce costs,
Oh my God.
because we're not even talking about how much it costs to have the marriage ritual, but the cost of divorce.
Yes. And the emotional cost of the child, sharing a child with someone that might now become your mortal enemy. And of course, the financial cost of you losing your property, your livelihood, and your financial security.
I 100% agree. And I always think that a lot of people don't want to talk about that because they want to sit in this idealized notion of what marriage is. Now, again, there are people that have happy marriages and they really do, to death do us part. It really can happen, but I don't think that is the majority of marriages. I think many people go in, and when I've even known people who said, "Well, marriage is hard work," and I'm like, well, hard work. I mean, I understand, any relationship there's a give and take, right? And there's effort. But when you make it seem like you're cutting down trees in order to put in your fireplace to keep you warm, I'm like, oh, it's so much work. Then why do you do it? What is the benefit?
Right. Well, as sociologists, especially, we would contextualize it within the larger society, the time period, and all these pressures and legislation and what people can and can't do. And so it's important to put these relationships within what's happening in society, because for marriage to say that it's a goal or it's a good thing that a marriage lasts forever, I mean, there's reasons why it lasts forever, right? Because,
Yeah.
for example, in the Philippines, divorce is illegal de facto. You cannot get a divorce in the Philippines. And the de facto part means that the cost of the divorce is equal to an annual salary. And so absolutely no regular Filipino can afford that. And so you can be in a country where divorce is just illegal, or previously in the US, it was at fault divorce, or
Mhm.
just, women can't afford to work, or they're not legally
Mhm.
allowed to
Mhm.
work. So they're
Mhm.
forced into these marriages, or, in a lot of, I would say, Indian cultural traditions, there's going to be so much cultural pressure to stay married, and of course perhaps arranged marriages, that people stay in the marriages for those kinds of reasons. So we have to really look at it structurally, and not like as the psychologists might, of just these two people in their love. But as sociologists, we see all the structures that keep people married or allow for them to separate when they want to, when they're miserable. The
Well,
most important piece is not to be miserable.
well, absolutely, absolutely. There's societal, there's cultural, there's religion, there's time and space context, those larger societal structures which we know exist. And that's the macro level, right? But when we look at why do people then have ideologies about their own individual lives, right? Because we, especially in this country where like you can think as you're an individual, but in the same sense, we have been socialized, and we have, many children have been exposed to these ideas through such means as the media. Disney, when I think of Disney, Disney is still putting forth this patriarchal
Yeah.
dominant notion of marriage. And I've even had like a 5-year-old say, why are you not married? And I'm like,
Yeah.
and
I guess,
I
yeah.
was stunned. I was stunned, Beverly. I didn't know what to say. And of course, I'm not going to indoctrinate anyone's children with my ideas, especially a 5-year-old. So the only thing I could say was like, hey, you know somebody? But I was like, oh my God, that early, it's already happening. So the
Yeah.
idea of marriage obviously has to have some structural benefit to society, at least in the governmental and financial and reproduction, reproduction of people, of course,
Right.
within that confine. So there is a lot of areas, and a lot of points of entry when you have this kind of discussion.
Right. And I guess, yeah, that's what we're talking about today is just
Right.
this sociological approach to
Yes.
understanding the recent history of marriage, singlehood, procreation, and then some of our contemporary alternatives that are juicy and
Yes.
exciting that Gen Z and onward might reshape the family, because we
Right.
have these pressures historically that confine to these particular institutions, especially religion. But the future is going to disintegrate into a vast array of options. And so it'll be interesting to see what maintains and what gets taken forth, but things can change. And I just predict that things are going to become more fragmented, more fragile, and people are just not going to commit to these long-term institutions, because the institutions also are not paying back the individual, like we can think about jobs and housing, student debt, college education. Why should people commit to these institutions when the institutions are not serving the people either?
Absolutely. When I think about like modern marriage, what are some of the structural benefits, at least to the individuals? We always think about companionate marriage. You want to find someone because you don't want to be lonely, you don't want to die alone, those kind of things, right? Or you find someone and you just have a lot of great times with them, and you're like, hey, we might as well get married. But it does split the cost of living in significantly, right? There are people who, again, have been married, it didn't work out, but because of the cost of living, they continue to live together, even though they're no longer married. I mean,
Yes.
these things say something about, once you cross that line, it's you've crossed a line that is going to be very difficult to undo. Even though we talk about companionate marriage, when you marry someone, you're still to some degree marrying into their family and their friend circle
Yeah.
as well.
I think, yeah, and in my marriage and family class, I used the historian Stephanie Kuntz, and she said, "What's the purpose of marriage?
Right.
It's to combine these two families."
Yes,
And so
yes.
that shows that the families choose that we should, join together through the marriage of these people. And so it's not about romantic love. She's always pointing out it's about
No,
joining
no.
these families. And she said that the detractors of that time, over 100 years ago plus, are saying, well, you can't rely marriage on love because people will fall in love with the wrong person and the wrong families will combine. This is about class interests, this is about
Right.
property, this is
Yes.
about passing on your property and inheritance down to the right social class. Really, it's about
Yes.
class
Yeah.
and
It,
maintaining class structures.
and one could say that it still is maintained at the highest levels
Yeah.
of a society through things like country clubs and exclusive
Yeah.
places where this mingling can happen in an
Right.
exclusive way, and again, so then, but for, let's say, the working class or lower class, marriage is more about the people, like, I love this person, everyone's expecting me to get married, but there may even be children, there might be a reason for marriage because of children, as opposed to getting married and then having children, but
Right.
having children and saying we
Sure.
should get married because there are some the benefits to raising children when you are married.
Yeah, absolutely. Look at the share of women in the UK who were ever married at a certain age, 1991 through
Mm,
2011. Look at how it's just right under 100%. It's
wow.
over 90% there. So that's just incredible amount
But
of
this
people that eventually get married.
it is, and I think that it really brings to light the idea of just getting married doesn't necessarily mean that people stay married. What is the average length of marriage? Do we know anybody personally who's been married for less than 3 years? So those kind of, it's still counted obviously in the marriage statistics, but I think in order to really say marriage as this functioning institution, there has to be some level of longevity. But wow, that's incredible right there. Those stats. And to me, Beverly, would you say that is a result of conformity to the socialized idea.
Yeah, that's what Stephanie Kuntz says. She says that when people say, is marriage declining or is marriage becoming a weaker institution? She says, absolutely not. Marriage is an incredibly strong institution because how many institutions, almost 90% of people will enter into at some point. And so, yes, people can
Right, right.
divorce. And we know that the divorce rate in the US is 50%. But we never say like subsequent divorces are go up from that. So the next rate of divorce for your second marriage is probably 67%, I'm guessing. And so it goes up from there. But why do people even get remarried again? You know, like I definitely have colleagues who I hear like they got married again. It's like, why bother? You know, you already did that first marriage, you had the kid, you had the house. But when the next relationship can just be for partnership, companionship, you don't need to go get married again, but
Yeah.
onto that kind of tradition somehow in feeling that you need to legitimize this relationship with the state, but also, of course, socially.
But my father, who was born in 1933, he's deceased now, but he married 5 times.
Oh,
He is a
okay.
true serial monogamist. I don't think there was ever more than a couple months in between, where in it, but the idea was like when if you found someone and then you're dating them and you marry them,
Right.
you would not live together. And I think a lot of that again is the residuals of Catholicism, where you would not live in sin, you would not cohabitate with someone. And if you're from a certain period and you've not changed your thinking and you just continue to operate under those principles. And that's the other thing, is there are many people who continue to operate under those principles and they don't see doing it in any other way. Plus, I think in general, when you said, why would someone get married? I think some people are so used to being married that they can't, that living single, which, for people like me who's like living single, that's like, it would be shocking to be married. Not like I wouldn't not be married, but I just, my life would be completely different. So I think people want to maintain certain things. And if the marriage ends, they want to find a replacement for that and just kind of continue
Right.
on.
That's the norm. I guess we can just mention the demographics, the trends overall. And so of course we're coming from a place where pretty much most people were assumed to be on the trajectory to get married, to stay married, to have their children after marriage. And so all of these trends are changing, and within the last 100 years, because probably our grandparents' generations had about 6+ children. And now, of course, our current generations have about 1 or 2 children.
Right.
So there is a trend, of course, overall that marriage is less entered into, but the US has higher rates of marriage than, say, Europe. Europe might have a lot higher rates of having children outside of marriage, especially in Northern European countries.
Mhm.
People are having fewer children. And of course, this is parallel to women having increased rights outside of the households, because really women were just forced into these relationships. They had to get married in order to escape their parents' house. They didn't have the right to have their own bank account before 1972, 73.
Yeah.
So they had to have a husband to get a bank account. Jobs could discriminate against women and say that they're not going to hire women. And so women financially had to get married to a man in order to survive. And then they have children, and then they have to become the primary caretakers of these children. And then globally, of course, things are a lot worse for women in their positions in these situations. So the trends are different, but you can definitely see a divide between Western countries and just higher income countries and stuff like that.
I mean, the fact that the structure of like the male domination in heterosexual marriages, that it persists in the modern day is
Right.
really just unbelievable if you really think about it.
Yeah,
But
because
again,
things could be changed in a different way. Like men could be more towards equality, if men really stepped it up in this area and helped out really equally or a lot more in these kinds of details, then women might be more interested in continuing these practices. But men are continuing to do less as far as the child rearing area. And so women are like, well, why should I be stuck with all this stuff? I'm going to do less too and be more like a man in that way. And so it's just too much of a burden. And of course, the state either subsidizes that or they don't. And so in European countries, we see up to a year leave paid for new parents. The US doesn't give that. Other European countries might provide childcare. We don't do that. So the state also needs to step it up. And indeed, we see many states like China, Korea trying to offer incentives to people to have children. But I think it's a lot coming from women not wanting to enter those traditional roles anymore.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And I think that really tying procreation to marriage, that's an important piece in the marital puzzle if you really think about it. Is a lot of people will still want they want that they want two incomes if possible in the modern day, right, to be able to raise children. But yeah, there are many men who are just will not step up to the plate and assume some of that responsibility. Now there are some, but it's still a very small number of men who will step up to the plate, and there still are a lot of women who will still believe that is the natural order of the universe, right? That they procreate and have children, and then if there's anything beyond that, like their own career and their own, that they have to add that on as well. When we think about marriage and we think about that procreation being a big part of it, the less people that get married, there might be a greater chance there'd be less procreation, and maybe if you think about it, like a shift in marriage, it could have some impact on population in the future. And when I think about my own trajectory, I've never felt like I was in a place financially or in terms of job stability to even say, you know what, I think I could get married and raise children. I was like, I just got to be able to survive on my own. And so that is something I'm really concerned about for future generations who are really not looking at the specific pieces that are not so romantic as it relates to, marriage and child rearing. And we're not even getting into some of the non-financial struggles of raising children in the modern day with so many influences and things happening. But yeah, I mean, it's like, can you really afford to, house, feed, take care of a child? That's a huge factor, I think, in making that determination.
Yeah, and our worlds and our lives are so much more individualistic than they used to be. We used to be more community oriented, so you would have had that family support for childcare. You would have lived close to your relatives and they would be helping out. But now we don't have that family support to help out with the child rearing. And so we have to outsource it to companies and pay those wages for someone to take care of your child.
Many individuals in my cohort, Generation X, give their children a lot more than I feel they should get because maybe they didn't get it right. But there's like this, and again, we see this level of entitlement in some of our own students. Not all of them, of course, but there's some you can tell that things have been taken care of, and there's no accountability, no personal responsibility. And living at home, and someone's paying for their phone and paying for their car and their insurance and just all these things. And I'm like, wow. So where is the drive to work harder? Where's the payoff happening in terms of parenting? What if you raise a child and that payoff never happens? And you raise a child who is not able to live on their own. And that's why, again, those in the discussion of like procreation, we gotta talk about those things. I don't think it's first date conversation, but I think if anything, the forum, of the modern classroom in sociology, when we're talking about families, really is the forum to be able to talk about these things, because
Yeah.
I don't think they'll get these conversations anywhere else. So I'm glad that we're really bringing these things up.
Right. And we're talking about the challenges of child rearing and the costs and all these real factors, because then we can understand and contextualize why people might choose not to have children or to have less children.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so, of
absolutely.
course, there is
Yeah,
definitely a raising amount of people who are choosing not to have children. Or, of course, folks are suffering from infertility issues. And so I do need to, mention that too, because I personally am child free, and it's always been my passion to remain child free. Like since I was 16 years old, I was asking, and another point too is, like, when I was 16, I wanted a tubal litigation, and I talked to the doctor about it, and they're like, hell no, like, no way. If you're of the demographic that the state wants to reproduce, because we know, of course, historically the state has done unethical sterilization
yes,
practices on Indigenous
yes,
women, Black women,
yes,
people of color, mentally ill people, and so on. So we do have that history in our country, but we also know that the government and the society wants certain demographics to reproduce and then stigmatizes other.
yes,
We have the Reagan's welfare queen image and stuff like that when we think about people who shouldn't reproduce because they can't afford it. But then, white, Asian, like high income people are, it's like, well, you can afford, you're a good family, you'd be a good, family, why not reproduce? So there's that kind of discriminatory pressures towards, demographics. So
sure.
I'm just saying that to say that when someone like me goes to the doctor at 18 and says, I want a tubal litigation, there's no way in hell that you can do that, especially you have no kids. But here I am, also, younger end of Gen X, and I never did have kids. So I was right and they were wrong, and they should have given me the tubal
Right,
litigation.
right.
A lot of us are not going to, make those choices, but the state won't facilitate those kinds of, especially now when we consider the criminalization of abortion and stuff like that.
Oh man.
And I had a student just doing a research project that incorporated vasectomies. We looked into some statistics on vasectomies. And of course, that is an extremely simple, easy procedure. And I think it's even covered by insurance. But because of our patriarchal context, that's not a popular choice, even though it's so much more invasive for a woman to
Sure,
get
sure, sure.
litigation. But those are also options that young people should consider, because that's more a procedure that would be permanent and help,
Yeah,
reduce these monthly pills and stuff like that.
absolutely, absolutely. I agree. And I also find it just really disheartening when you find the medical industrial complex like refusing to comply with what an individual has chosen for
I
themselves.
could have gotten all these other, breast implants or
Right.
surgeries and
Yeah,
deforming
yeah,
medical procedures,
yeah,
no
yeah.
problem. But something like this that goes against the social script is
Yeah,
problematic.
absolutely,
But if I was doing
absolutely.
cosmetic procedures to make myself more of a attractive woman, which is an appropriate way for women to behave in our social scripts, then no
Yes,
problem, get as
yes, yes.
they let teenagers get, breast implants or your high school graduation
Right.
present, here you go.
Yeah, but like you said, it really speaks to this um, control of reproduction to maintain and perpetuate the system
Right. And that's
as it is.
ultimately the criminalization of abortion is just nothing more than the state trying to control and force this will upon the people. And they don't give a
Yes,
damn about your little personal opinions and stuff, because the state wants more
yeah,
American workers that it can control.
absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. And just all that, just like you said, the interconnection and interconnectivity of these social institutions are related to marriage, procreation, singlehood, right? Things,
Right.
government and all and the economics and the penal system. It's just all
And
we
the
are not
correct
this.
demographic that the state is trying to shape, because I always push back when people talk about declining fertility rates or declining population numbers in particular
Yeah,
Western or East Asian countries, because that's not an issue. As you mentioned, that the global population is exploding. And so we
yeah,
have population explosion. There's no issue with lack of people. They're just talking about the particular people. They want their
yes,
demographic, their nationality to reproduce, because you can always just loosen the border restrictions and bring in workers. They're all around the world.
yeah,
They're, whatever you want out there. But looking at places like Japan and their declining population numbers and aging population, and worried about the older generations being taken care of by younger generations, I mean, that is a xenophobic society that does not want to bring in a lot of outside different people of other nationalities. But that's
yes,
certainly an option for any country. So it's not an issue that we're running out of people at all.
right,
It's just the type of people that they're employing
yes.
within that statement.
And that's when I think one of the challenges of being a sociologist is you see these things and it's so frustrating because you feel almost a sense of not being able to control or impact anything, right? But I think the best thing that we can do is really to honestly and openly talk about these things, especially as it relates to individual choices and decisions that people make and what the implications of these individual choices and decisions have upon the larger society.
Obviously, we know about the China one child policy historically and how that was incredible outcome way for the state to shape reproduction in society. And so now, of course, China is changing and saying that they want to encourage people to have more children, and the women just aren't having it. They're like, now they and all of, the one child only policy, of course, created generations of single children that were very spoiled. And so
Yes.
these also were, the women were single children who were spoiled and want now their own careers and stuff like that. So they're pushing back on it. And so I found these two articles. In China, ruled by men, women quietly find a powerful voice. That women are coming together to push back against this childbearing culture, to create more spaces where they can explore their own individuality and
Mhm.
interests, and push back against this state pressure to have more children. One other article about Chinese women, and this article focused in to three particular women who were talking about how they did have one child, but that's plenty. And now they have their own careers. They want to have more children. And but that of course they still have pressure from their parents, their in-laws to have more children, but
Mm.
it does cost a lot. This is really a lot of the things we're talking about are coming from especially the changing role of women in society, and men's role has remained more stable over time. And so that also contributes to men's crisis in society of women are changing so rapidly. So how are men supposed to change, and their own insecurities about how they should, match this kind of changing demographics and gender role behaviors?
Well, I think that there are still many men who formulate their identity as a provider and the provider of a wife and children. I mean, it's just as simple as that. That is still predominant form is a one man, one woman. They have children, and the man feels a sense of identity for providing. And like you said, when you mentioned the government saying don't only have one child, now have many children, right? It's like, what are you talking about? Once you can't just, people are not puppets like that. But the family, the influence of family on and the social pressure of families, I think, is much stronger outside of this country, definitely in other
Absolutely.
cultures and other countries. I think because we've been in this mode of individuality, even though there are people who do have some strong families, and again, it's never all or nothing, right? But there are many who are very much disconnected from their families. They don't live in the same city. There may have been dysfunction and they've removed themselves from that dysfunction. And so that influence of family no longer remains the way that it did. And then it's almost kind of the same as looking at like religiosity, the decline of religiosity as an influence in the choices that people make throughout their life. But ultimately, are people making choices outside of what they really want? And that's where there's some, could be some serious discussions. And when I love to see people push back against what they're being told to do because they've already made their decision.
And to create that space where you can even question what you've been told and what you're being pressured
Yes.
to do is significant. And so that's why it's interesting for us to talk to our students about these kinds of changing demographics and changing opportunities.
Yeah.
And I talked to one of my students who is an Indian American woman, and she's, on the path to becoming a doctor, and her brother's a doctor. And she said that her parents are pressuring her to get married and have children. And I said something like, your brother already is a doctor and has children. Like, can't you be off the hook? She's just like, there's no way in hell, like I have to do this, And so I think we need to understand that our students are not all white Americans and even
Right.
Asian Americans. Like, we have different opinions and stuff, but that is huge, is in African students and so on. Like, our
Yes.
global
Yeah.
student body has different pressures, and their parents might be immigrants from another place. We've been talking about history, global trends, and stuff like that, the pressures of these historical patterns that were continued to be pressured into. But now we're going to transition our conversation into modern options that are new and developing, and alternatives from, perhaps
Sure.
now we can choose not to get married or get married 5 times,
Right.
or we can, have different kinds of family formations. So we're just talking about how things are changing in the future. And so now, people might not have children. They might get married more times or less times for shorter periods. But also, of course, there's same-sex marriage. But we as Americans might think that this is a thing in the world, right? And I just want to remind us the context of same-sex marriage and its legality around the world, because here's the map. And so we can see that same-sex marriage is a Western legality and concept. And so we can see that the majority of countries in the entire globe are grayed out, and that means that it is not legal. And so just that this is not like a globally widespread thing. And a lot of our ideas coming from the West do not resonate globally. And so things are changing unevenly.
I wanted to get some stats on same-sex marriage. It says that as of the latest data, about 568,000 same-sex couples are married in the U.S., which represents a significant increase from the 2010 census, which recorded 131,000 married same-sex couples. And then I was like, I wonder what the divorce rate of those couples are. And a 2011 study indicated the annual divorce rate for same-sex couples was about 2%, similar to the rate for opposite-sex couples. Lesbian couples are more likely to divorce compared to gay male couples. For instance, in the UK, 75% of same-sex divorce petitions were filed by lesbian couples, a trend observed similarly in the US and other countries. Overall, female same-sex marriages tend to have higher dissolution rates than male same-sex marriages. I don't know what that's about or what we could attribute that factors to, but there was a part of me when same-sex marriage became legalized. I was like, I bet those marriages are going to be last longer. There's going to be less divorce. For some reason, I just felt that maybe at the root of some divorce is the patriarchy being present, right? The male female discordance, but the research doesn't necessarily show that. It just looks like the dissolution of marriage is really about incompatibilities between individuals.
Interesting. I'm going to guess that lower divorce rates are also going to be correlated to levels of religiosity, and that
Mm,
people are going to divorce less because of having higher religiosity and that
yeah,
they have a
yeah,
problem religiously. But I think there's other barriers than just extreme bliss for 35 years with your partner that
yeah,
are going
exactly.
to factor into that divorce kind of decision. So
Absolutely, absolutely. But the idea of same-sex marriage I find also interesting because it is like it's the recreation of marriage, right? It's like not
yeah.
it's not a new union, right? It's just recreating even in ritual, right? Even in the ritual
Yeah.
format is different. So there's no differentiation, and it's still kind of like, well, if I can't completely conform, but I can conform to this point. So even though some people may be opposed to same-sex marriage, right? It is still fueling the conformist idea of marriage being a part of someone's trajectory, whether it's with a person of another gender or of the same gender, right? But I think that if we decide that we maybe don't want to marry anyone, right? Just as we might decide we want to marry someone, right? Someone may, throughout their whole life, what do you want? What's your future look like? I want to get married. I want to have kids, right? Some people have already decided that that's what they want. But is it possible, do you think, for someone to decide that, you know what, I don't want to be married? I don't think it's my thing because they've tested it out with the long-term relationships or even have cohabitated, right? I think cohabitation will really give you a sense of kind of marriage life to some degree, right? Without actually getting married. And someone may say, you know what, I don't think that it's for me. And so we have this new marital form
Yeah. And
called sologamy.
not marriage, like to
Yes.
not get marriage
Yeah.
but not as a default, not as a sad thing that never happened because
Not
you're
as
such a
a
loser.
reactionary measure.
Something you
But even when
chose.
we talk
Like you
about,
chose
and I
it.
know I know, and I know we've both done some, poking around to find out what's going on in these people marry themselves. And whether it's a man or a woman, I still see the text tux. I still see the dress. I still see the flowers. I still see the acknowledgement. I still see all these ritualistic aspects of marriage, just only one person being there. Why not take the opportunity to create a new ritual? If you want a ritual, if you want some kind of social validation and acknowledgement, I understand, hey, that's what you want, but why still follow that very rigid traditional structure, which is basically saying if you don't, you're saying I might not be marrying another person, but I want to do the same ritual as if I was. That is still against applying the legitimacy of marriage, whereas it's not offering something different, something new. I think it is relatively new. And again, when I asked some of my students what their thoughts were on sologamy, I had talked a little bit about it on camera, what I had learned, what it is, and it's not the same as singlehood. Singlehood, you can be single. That is who you are. That's what you're doing. It does not involve this ritualistic aspect and this social acknowledgement of, again, if marry yourself then and you meet somebody along the way, because you're not legally married to anyone else, you could actually still become married, right? It's not like you need to divorce yourself. There's like no legal implications. It's really a socially symbolic ritual of saying that I'm single and I'm happy. I think there's a lot of good aspects to what that acknowledgement is. I don't think it needs to fit in the shoe print, but there are people who said, you know what, I'm such and such an age. I'm not married yet. All my friends are married. Everybody's had a wedding. I've gone to everyone's wedding. I'm not in a relationship with someone. I don't see myself getting in a relationship with someone, although it could happen. But if you know anything about the dating scene, you got to put time and effort into that. You don't just meet someone at the grocery store. It could happen, but it's very highly unlikely. So people saying, you know what, I'm happy with the lifestyle that I have. There's certain benefits to this lifestyle that you don't get with marriage, and I'm just going to adopt it as part of my identity rather than, like you said, kind of a reactionary measure. Like, if no one's going to marry me, I'll marry myself. I don't see it at that as well. I see it as like a self-empowerment move and a public acknowledgement maybe for other people who are naysayers when it comes to singlehood. I think that there's a potential for eliminating some of those double standard stigmatized titles like the spinster, which with women, obviously being single at a certain age, there's a lot of social stigma, whereas a man, there's freedom and bachelorhood. I think there would be a greater social acknowledgement benefit for women to say, I've chosen this. This is what I want. I think that's different than saying this is all I got. So when you think about ritualizing it, but again, it's still lending credence to this idea that we have to be married either to ourselves or to someone else in order to be a valid adult. I still see people who are in this society, people who are married with families, as having greater value to society, if you will, than someone who has never been married and never have kids. They're kind of like not seen as valuable to society.
Some of these folks that are participating in this ritual are also doing it as a form of performance art, and they've also gotten other people to perform this ritual. And so, or they have performed the ceremony for many other women as well. And so each person then might be promoting this kind of concept further onward as this like performative statement, really a feminist statement.
I mean, the interesting thing about sologamy is because it's new, there's not like a lot of data on it, on gender, on whether or not these individuals have children, right? They maybe have children, maybe they've been divorced, right? There's a lot of things that, again, I just think it's for a topic of discussion. It's interesting to think about, and, not just for what it means in the specificity of it, but I think what it does is, as adults in this modern society, I think many of us are searching for some type of rite of passage, if you will, of like validation. Like, we are not very ritually oriented, especially if you are not a religious person. You're not engaging in any rituals. I think rituals could be really a powerful thing in one's life, but I think that if we're going to create something that's new, that is thought, it's almost like if you think about Kwanzaa, for example, right? Like, create something that doesn't exist, that says something meaningful without just getting on the back of something that was already there.
Right.
So maybe, so if someone does want to say, why couldn't it be like the ritual of like, I'm happy being single? That'll be, there's a ritual around that rather than, recreate a kind of that marital ritual. But again, it makes a strong statement of the importance of ritual to people. And after you've graduated, I guess, all you have left is like, for rituals like marriage and then retirement, I guess, are kind of the rites of passage.
It reminds me of instead of Valentine's Day, celebrating that as single day, especially. I think that was a big thing in China. It's also interesting just that this is a global phenomenon.
So I would say anywhere there is marriage happening, there's going to be a marriage to oneself happening, because there's always going to be people who are like, what about me? I want to have a wedding, but I don't want to get married to someone, right? Again, because I want to have a wedding. I mean, weddings are fun. They could be really big events other than funerals at bringing people together. So there's a powerful thing. And I think people would be more likely to go to a wedding than they would to like Sam's birthday party when he turned 52 or something,
Right.
So I think people long for that kind of ritual in bringing people together. And I think that we can do better in formulating something new and original that's more meaningful, that's based upon a person's. I don't think people quite get it. I think they just see, for example, in my class, I gave them a photo of a woman who was marrying herself. So all I say is like, describe what you see and what meaning is it communicating. And I would say about 75% of people thought she was the bridesmaid.
Oh,
and they
okay.
just even couldn't even conceptualize it that that there would be someone marrying themselves. They didn't even notice that because they attune that ritual to, a man and a woman.
Right. And it also, I am guessing that it's a pushback on our current app-based dating culture, which is a
Mm.
consumer-based market, which reduces
Oh,
all of us people into ever replaceable commodities. And so just the social media aspect to our relationships now. And so we can think about the context of the dating app culture, and that people also don't want to commit to a relationship because you can keep swiping and finding someone better. And so just this aversion to
mm,
commitment and to really
mm,
sticking it out with one person rather than logging back in and seeing who's next. And so because a single person is assumed to be dating, to be seeking a partner,
yes,
and
yeah,
to be incomplete, to be not
yes,
in their chosen space. And so this ritual is making a statement that I'm not seeking dating. I'm satisfied with myself. This is the life that I'm committed to.
yes.
And that it's not a person in waiting for that person to come along.
Such excellent points. I think it really does say that. I'm not seeking, right? Because then this is the idea of the person who is married or in monogamous relationship. They view other people's lives through that. So like, are you dating? And if someone said they weren't dating, then it's kind of like, what's wrong with you? you know Again, a reactionary measure as opposed to something that someone has made a decision about. And
Right.
then there's people who've been married for so long they have no idea. They've never had to go onto the dating sites. They've never had to go through that process because they were married or coupled long before this became so
Right.
prominent in the dating world. So I don't think that they quite grasp and understand the complexities of modern, if you will, dating, coupling,
Right.
trying to meet someone.
Well, our generation also has a really good perspective as far as breadth of perspective on the dating app culture, because we were there, of course, before it came about, and
Right.
we are there now when
Right.
the Gen Z millennials perhaps were raised into that. So it was a weird anomaly at the beginning of, the development of these apps.
Yes.
It was stigmatized, shall we say.
Yeah.
And now it's probably lost most of its stigma, and a huge percentage of relationships are going to begin on apps now. And it's
Yes.
probably the norm, basically.
Right. It is.
Shifted to a position where now this is the norm, and it's really changed how, of course, we date. And for not for the better necessarily. I think it really
No.
does cause a lot of negative mental health outcomes, similarly to social
Yeah.
media in general.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think I mean, we could talk extensively about the problems inherent in remote work and not meeting people in person, and how different it is, the self-presentation that you can control online versus what you cannot control when you're there in person, those kind of things. It's a very different world out there. And I think that we probably have to say there's a relationship between that and people affirming a sologamist proclamation, if you will. And to what degree does a person find benefit in these, or are they oppressed, or are they finding benefit? And their degree of participation, again, they're
Right.
playing these things out. And again, there's women who say, man, men can't do that. I mean, I know that there's cultural differences, but I have students who are still, who still believe that, women are better at doing X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, they're better because they're taught that they not only that they should, but they're taught how to do these things, in the home. You can teach anybody domestic roles. You really can.
And we have the male feigned incompetence, like he screws up the laundry on purpose, so he
Exactly.
never has to do it
And that's
again.
why I say, and they buy into that. You get to claim incompetence for anything, and people are going to say, I'll do it. You
Yeah,
can't do it well.
exactly.
I'll do it.
Exactly. All right. So it sounds like we're winding down. So do you have
Yeah.
any final concluding thoughts or other things you wanted to point out on this topic?
Whether it's your choice to be married, your choice to procreate, your choice to be single, it is your choice, but do not make a choice in a vacuum. Really understand the multi-level complexities around your individual decision, how you came to that decision, and really think through the consequences of every decision before taking action, and again, when I tell, again, we're in a prime position to be able to get students' minds thinking. I'm not trying to deter someone from having children and being married, like it's terrible and children cost so much money. I'm not trying to deter that. I'm saying I want you to really be cognizant and aware of what it takes and how complex it is, and are you willing to sacrifice, all the time, all the effort, and just all the emotional challenges that go into a relationship, and having children and raising children. But once you have children, you really can't do that. And so keep that in mind. It's a lifelong commitment. And even the person that you married, especially if you have children, it may not work out, but you are going to be connected and bonded to that person throughout your entire life, no matter whether you're married to them or not, if you're having children with them. I think if you get married to someone, then you get divorced, you don't have children, I think there's a greater possibility that you could just move on without that connection. But that person that you're considering getting married to and having children with, really get to know them and really get to know yourself.
I would echo that and just say that the stakes are so high and that we really don't have the luxuries that the previous generations had as far as just the resources, that every single little thing is so expensive. And this is for your forever, for the rest of your life, if you have kids, or even just that track record of your marriages and divorces. So just go into it. As sociologists, we have the opportunity to really understand what's happening in the world, our larger structures, or the statistics, and to understand how these are going to impact us. So we have the sociological tools to understand what we're getting into and to really construct the life that we want for ourselves in the future.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I think this is a great conversation, especially for us sociologists of family and demographic trends. And I really appreciate you having this conversation with me today about just historically where we've been as far as marriage and singlehood, and just the exciting changes that are developing with the younger generations.
Yeah, and if you find this conversation interesting, have it with other people in your life. Have it with your parents or your grandparents. Have it with your brothers, sisters, friends, people who are married, who are not married. Really start to talk these things out instead of only thinking about them to yourself. And I just feel like anything that we discuss openly and honestly is going to benefit everyone in the end.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much for our conversation today.